thank you, Neil. Thank you for that very happy reminder of a lovely day on Spurn Point, dealing with some really challenging issues. Thank you all very much for coming to this plenary session. Really appreciate all of you turning up for the last session of the conference. I'd like to thank CIFA as well for inviting this session, inviting me to speak at this session. I'd like to thank Andrea, whose idea this was. And I'm very honoured that I have some colleagues here who are wanting to speak about the book. I don't know what they're going to say yet, but I'm very pleased that they're here and have an opinion on it, whatever that opinion might be. So I'm very grateful for that. So let me begin then, I'm going to define wicked problems. I'm going to present a little bit of the theory behind wicked problems and the way that this idea first emerged. And then I'm going to just very briefly give you some examples, recognizing, in fact, having been here all day, that this, at least the part of the conference that I've been at, has been packed full of what I call small wins or small gains. So I will give you a few examples of my own, which will overlap with some of the ones that have occurred in the sessions. But I'll do that and then summarize at the end and then hand over to the other panel members. One of the things about wicked problems is that the solution to them requires interdisciplinary thinking. And I think it's really interesting that the original concept of wicked problems and the definition of that term came out of an interdisciplinary collaboration between a mathematician and a planner, Horst Rittel and Mel Weber at Berkeley. And they received a grant from NASA, of all people, to look at ways in which the technologies and the ideas being developed for the space programs in the 1960s could be applied and transferred across into some of the problems that were facing the US specifically for this grant at that same time. So some of the urban problems that were being faced at that particular time. So I think it's really interesting that that's the origin of the concept. NASA, a mathematician and a planner coming together. And the term wicked problems came out of a research seminar that was set up as part of that grant, where someone, an audience member in response to one of the speakers said, "That sounds like a wicked problem to me," and the term was adopted. And then much later, publications started to appear that used that term and referenced that particular point where the term originated. So that's the origin of the term, and it's widely used now across a whole range of different disciplines and subjects. So in terms of a definition, Rittel suggested that the term wicked problems refers to that class of problems which are, quote, ill-formulated, where the information is confusing, where there are many clients and decision makers with conflicting values, and where the ramifications in the whole system are thoroughly confusing. And in the book, I deal with 5 of them, recognizing that there are many more. So climate change, environmental pollution, health and well-being, social injustice and conflict are the ones that I deal with. I toyed with the idea of a food security chapter. I didn't feel I was running out of steam by that point anyway, but maybe that's another research project, although I know that there are other people working in that field, so it doesn't need me to provide comment on that really. There's also a chapter in the middle of the book on entanglement, which I'll come to in a second. So you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them, covering a whole range of issues which overlap and interrelate really nicely with most of the things people would identify as wicked problems. So this is really useful. It's graphic, it's a standout illustration which is very widely used, recognized and cited. But I do have a problem with it, and it relates to that issue of entanglement. So by looking at this illustration, you kind of get the impression that these problems all kind of stand alone. And the point about wicked problems is that they don't. They are all deeply enmeshed or entangled with one another. So this is one way of presenting wicked problems through this UN Sustainable Development Goals illustration. This is the version that I prefer. It's not my illustration. I've taken it from a Google image search. But this, for me, encapsulates what wicked problems are all about. It's just a really confusing picture without any kind of direction or structure to it. So this is the image that I prefer, recognizing, of course, that the Sustainable Development Goals image is a lot more accessible and a lot easier to follow and to understand. So wicked problems is a term that's been around for a long time. A term that's been around a slightly shorter time is super wicked problems. And I particularly like this concept, and I think it works really well for us because it brings in the dimension of time, not deep time looking backwards, but time looking forwards, and the fact that time is limited. We have very little time in which to deal with some of these problems and try to find some sort of a solution to them. So the definition of super wicked problems in the literature is that time is running out. There's no central authority, or only a weak central authority, to manage that problem. And the same actors causing the problem seem to be the people required to solve it as well. So we can think about closer to my interests, environmental pollution is an example of that. Time is running out. There's no central authority. And the people creating the problem also are required to solve the problem. But one could also bring climate change into that as well as another example. But the key thing is that time is a central factor in these super wicked problems and finding solutions to those super wicked problems. We can't just hang around. We need to do something about it. And this comes back to that issue of entanglement or mess. And how all of these things are interrelated. I'm not going to read any of these quotes, by the way. You can read them if you wish to. But it's about the idea that all of these problems are entangled, and we need to be really careful of that when we're looking for solutions, because finding a solution to one problem could exacerbate the situation for another. Social injustice and climate change, for example, is often quoted as an example of this. If you find solutions to climate change in a particular location, it might have an unfortunate bearing on some of the people that live in those areas, for instance, or their income stream, or their homes. So we need to be aware of that overlap and that entanglement. That's really important. So how can heritage practice and archaeology and the work that we all do ever hope to resolve global challenges on this scale and of this complexity? And that was the question that I posed when I was putting this book together. And I'm a realist, so my answer to that question is that maybe it can't, and that we do need to be realistic about that. But we can make significant contributions to these particular challenges nonetheless. And I think we can do that in two ways, at least two ways. One of them is through small wins, which I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes referred to as small gains, and sometimes referred to by people in other disciplines as nudges. And there's a whole area of theory called nudge theory about this. But the key thing with small wins is that it's recognized, and it's a concept that came out of psychology, and it's recognized by psychologists as a really significant and meaningful way of addressing some of these wicked problems, because they do benefit the communities that you're working with. Recognizing that it doesn't resolve the whole problem, but it does resolve a part of the problem for maybe a particular group of people. But also it helps us. It makes us, this was in the previous session about how we feel as archaeologists. It helps us to feel better about the work that we do, that we are actually making an impact and making a difference. So small wins comes from psychology, and it's recognized as something that is beneficial. It's defined, small wins, I said I wouldn't read the quotes, but I will read the highlighted part just in case you're struggling to see that. It is key to this. Small wins are defined as concrete, small scale, in-depth, positive changes which can lead to transformative change as they accumulate. And that's the key thing. We need to try to work these small wins together somehow so that they do build momentum. So small wins is one of the two ways in which we can achieve this, and I've been here all day and I've heard lots of examples of what I would call small wins. You as the people doing this work may not think of them in that way, but that's how I think of them. And the second one is about policy entrepreneurship. It's not quite the same thing, but another term for this, which I've seen people using, is influencers. So these are people who can make change, create opportunities for change by having the right connections, talking to the right people. So this is from a piece of research within the social sciences. One can nearly always pinpoint a particular person or a few persons who were central in moving a subject up the agenda and into position for enactment. This is relating to health, but it's the same thing applies. So what makes a successful policy entrepreneur? Could you be a successful policy entrepreneur? I know I couldn't. But some of you will have the necessary skills to be able to do really well in this area. So first of all, you need a claim to a hearing. So that could be expertise, it could be the ability to speak to others as the leader of an interest group, for example, or you may have an authoritative decision-making position, such as chairpersonship of a committee or an organization. You're someone who is known for your connections or your negotiating skills. And persistence is really important as well. Sheer tenacity pays off. And how do you do this? Giving talks, writing position papers, sending letters to important people, drafting bills, testifying, having lunch, and so forth. And that's how you with the right people, you can start to influence the way they think about things. The examples that you've got to bring to their attention may inspire them to have further conversations, to talk to others, to release funding, and all those kind of things. So it's a really useful way, I think, to think about this. We don't teach, I can speak personally about this at York, but I think generally we don't teach our students these skills. Some people just have them naturally and are able to do this, but maybe it is something that we should include within our educational programs. I should also add at this point that this isn't for everybody by any means. Some people want to be out there on the streets protesting about things and being a lot more activist, and that's fine too. It's about the approach that best suits your personality and what gives you the most pleasure and what gives you the greatest sense of satisfaction and of achievement. The fact that you feel as though you're making a difference. If that's being out there protesting, great. If it's talking to MPs, having lunch and talking to them about some great examples like the ones that I've been listening to today, then that's another approach. Realistically, we probably need both. So there's an issue here as well with project management and how funders like to see projects managed. The prescriptive model, which appears on that graph as the solid line, is the standard approach to project management and the one that funders like to see. It doesn't lend itself well to wicked problems. So the solid line, you learn about the problem, you analyze it, you develop solutions to the problem, and then you implement that solution or a selection of those solutions. And it's pretty straightforward. And you go from problem to solution along the course of the project timeline. The dotted line is what happens with wicked problems, where finding a solution is incredibly hard. And it's very much more experimental. So you come up with an idea for how you might tackle this particular wicked problem and you try it out. And unsurprisingly, probably, it doesn't work, but you learn stuff in the process. So you go back, not quite to square one, but somewhere close to square one, and you have another go. And the same thing happens. You learn some more stuff, but you still haven't solved the problem. And backwards and forwards you go between problem and solution until at some point in the future, who knows how far ahead, we end up below that line in the solution space. But we don't know how long that's going to take, and we may never get there. So that's the reality of the way that I think we need to think about wicked problems and the optimism or not that we have for resolving them. It's also where small wins come in, because small wins can follow that solid line. So just 3 examples. I prepared these about a week or so ago, not knowing what sessions I was going to attend. I did actually attend the one that focuses on health and well-being this morning and this afternoon. So I'm not going to say much about any of these examples. It's just really just a taster of some of the things that are in the book, and just to highlight the diversity of projects that we could be thinking about in terms of these small wins. First of all, very high level, very large longitudinal studies that have been undertaken, and there are many of them which look at health alongside cultural participation, and health both in the context of physical and mental health, also relating to what's variously defined as different types of happiness, but also longevity as well. So there are many of these projects. I talk about some of them in the book. Quite a few of them have been undertaken in Northern European countries. So we need to remember that when we're thinking about some of these results. But the key thing that comes out of all of these projects is the very strong positive correlation between cultural participation and active cultural participation, primarily, and health and happiness and longevity. So, I mean, it seems pretty obvious, I guess, but the data support this, and that I think is really important, and it provides a useful context for some of the small wins type projects that we can do, because we know from this kind of work and these kind of longitudinal studies that they are going to have a benefit. We talked about in the session this morning and this afternoon, speakers and participants talked about social prescribing a few times. I don't know whether the flow state was specifically mentioned, but that's the experience of being so engrossed in a task that everything else is forgotten, and that's a really important part of the process, I think, and why some of these projects are so significant. But social prescribing is something that a number of projects and commercial companies are doing. York Archaeology's Archaeology on Prescription, which has sadly now lost its funding and its staff. I met with some of them the other day to try to explore ways of taking that forward in a different way. But it's very sad that York Archaeology have cut that loose. I don't fully understand the reasoning behind it yet, but I'll try and find out. Great example, though, of working with people with physical and mental health issues, and having this exercise and this activity, this opportunity prescribed to them. It's been very successful, and the hope is that it will continue. And I know other people are doing this kind of work as well. I'm just more familiar with the York example. There's obviously Operation Nightingale, award-winning project doing wonderful work, and to my mind, one of the great benefits of and the great successes of Operation Nightingale is all of the spin-off projects, the projects that reference Operation Nightingale as their source of inspiration. I was lucky enough to be in Australia for a keynote in December, and I showed a similar slide to this, and a number of people came up and said, oh, we've got in different states, we've got this project. There's Operation Warhorse is the one I know best in South Australia, run out of Flinders University, but there are a number of these projects now on different scales, but it's just so great to see one example, and I think it was one example originally, and then it kind of just grew out of that and expanded. So it's a great example for lots of different reasons. So that was very brief, and all my examples are equally brief, you'll be pleased to hear. So environmental pollution is the second of my three. I was talking to someone about this earlier, actually. As an undergraduate, one of the key things on my reading list was Bill Rathje's work on garbology, and this was an inspiration to me as an undergraduate, because this was an archaeologist who had been undertaking conventional commercial archaeology in the United States, up until the point where he decided to develop this project looking at garbology and contemporary rubbish, on the basis that, well, if we can study ancient stuff as an archaeologist, why can't we apply those same methods to the modern world? And so his project was very influential to me. I probably wouldn't be doing this if that particular project and those publications hadn't inspired me as an undergraduate. So Bill Rathje's work is I think really important in shaping a lot of what we now refer to as contemporary archaeology. And one of my examples is the work I've done in Galapagos with the Galapagos Conservation Trust and with a number of other universities, looking at object itineraries and basically trying to understand where the plastic is coming from by using an archaeological approach, treating all of these things just as if they were ancient artifacts, trying to understand how they've been used, how long they've been around for, how long have they been in the ocean for, can we tell where they came from originally, and all those kind of questions, but doing it through an archaeological lens. I mentioned right at the start that addressing wicked problems requires interdisciplinary thinking and interdisciplinary solutions, and this project is no exception. So I played a very small part in this project. I was the archaeologist, although I had a PhD student who joined me later to participate in this as well. But apart from us, it was a whole combination of ecotoxicologists, marine biologists, ecologists, oceanographers, and several others that I can't remember. But it was a very interdisciplinary and quite a large team who were working on this. Our part of the project was very specific, but it was all mixed in together. And we all worked together, corresponded with one another, and so forth. A large part of this particular project was about community engagement and impact. So a lot of the workshops we did, a lot of the archaeological work we did looking at these objects was with people who are local, live in the Galapagos. As you can see from the right-hand slide, a lot of those people are young people. That felt really important. Some of them already work on environmental projects, such as looking after and monitoring and guarding sea turtle nests and things like that. But some of them aren't involved at all. Some of them come from poorer backgrounds, and this was all a bit of a revelation. They don't really have very much what most people would consider conventional archaeology in Galapagos. It only really started to be settled after Darwin had been there. But we invited them to be archaeologists for the day with a whole collection of plastics to investigate, and they loved it. They loved the thought of investigating these things and trying to tell stories about some of these objects. So the final example is just on social injustice, and this refers back to the work that Rachel Kiddy did originally in Bristol with me. It was the Bristol project was a collaborative project, but then as a result she came to York to do her PhD with me, and then did a project in York on homelessness, homeless people. And you can see in the images there, the central image is Stokes Croft area of Bristol, where most of this project unfolded. In fact, both of those two photographs are of Stokes Croft. And then Rachel's book, which if you haven't read that, I would encourage you to do so. It's a really good book, and the voices of the homeless participants that we worked with come out very strongly in that narrative. Rachel also published a graphic novel, I think it's probably how she would describe it, in the Journal of Contemporary Archaeology in 2015. And this is, I've included this particular section because this is where Rachel introduces me to some homeless people that she'd been working with. And there we are on the streets of Bristol, talking about how we're going to do this work. And the fact that it involved, first of all, a kind of what we called field work, but basically was walking around the city, being led by the homeless participants that we worked with. They were the experts in this particular project, so we were led entirely by them, but led eventually to an excavation of a homeless place. And then in York, the Good Organisation, which is a CIC based in the city. And they now run, they've set themselves up with a whole series of heritage projects. The one that you see in the image there is people with lived experience of homelessness having been trained up to act as tour guides. And they take the members of the public on tours, which of course members of the public pay for. And the homeless tour guide gets an income from that. They've designed the tours themselves, so they pick a theme that they're interested in, and they're not encouraged, but they're not discouraged from bringing their own lived experience into the tour as well. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them do that. So the person that goes on that tour learns a little bit about the theme, but they also learn a little bit about what it's like to live in York as a homeless person. So I'm just drawing to the end now. This is an image that is included in the book. It's kind of upside down really, but it shows how what I'm proposing in the book aligns with what the European Commission talk about as describe as the missions-led approach, where we have those sustainable development goals at the top, which everyone is trying to address in some way, and they create missions, which are the bigger, the sort of the big themes that they want to look at, and then the mission projects, which are the kind of smaller scale interventions, which I would describe as the small wins, which feed into those missions, which then in turn feed into the wicked problem. And it's that kind of model that I'm thinking about, and there are quite a few politicians, not just in the UK, but in other countries as well, that talk in these, use this same terminology. So maybe there's another way in which we can present this when we're acting out our role as policy entrepreneurs and talking to people. We need to sometimes maybe adjust the language that we use according to the audience that we're working with.